Hello and welcome to Pathways, where you are invited to join me for a visit with leaders in personal development and cultural evolution. This is your host, Paulo O'Brien. In 2020, 90,000 Americans died from taking too many harmful drugs at one time. Many people struggle with addiction, but it is possible to recover and experience a life lived awake and alert, a life vibrating at a higher frequency of increased creativity and joy. The sober life can even include social inclusion, fun, and fellowship. Our guest today is Leonard Buschel, author of the new book, High, Confessions of a Cannabis Addict. As told in this fascinating memoir, some of the more dangerous times of Leonard's life included hitchhiking to high school every day for 3 years, smuggling hashish from Israel to America twice, sniffing cocaine up both nostrils daily for 13 years, and smoking pot much longer than that. And oh yeah, he was a drug dealer for 26 years, and he never got busted. Leonard is a Philadelphia native and now a happy Los Angeles transplant. He has over 2 decades of clean and sober recovery from drugs and alcohol. He attended Naropa University in Boulder. He is a certified substance abuse counselor with years of experience at this point. He is the founder of Writers in Treatment. His primary purpose is to promote treatment as the best first step solution for addiction, alcoholism, and other self-destructive behaviors. Leonard is also the director of the 13-year-old Real Recovery Film Festival and Symposium, and for 6 years he's been the editor-publisher of the weekly Addiction Recovery eBulletin. He also directs and produces the annual Experience, Strength, and Hope Awards in Los Angeles. Hello, Leonard, and welcome to the Pathway Show.
Hello, Paulo. Thank you for inviting me.
It's very nice that right behind your head we can see your book on the YouTube version of this podcast. And it's a beautiful cover, and I assume that's a picture of you as a young man on the cover.
22 years old.
Awesome.
I was actually happier than I look.
Now, let me start by asking, why did you write this book? And I also want to know how much of an influence on you was the author Henry Miller?
Henry didn't start to write professionally until he was 40 years old. So I didn't start to write this book until I was in my in my 60s, after I got sober, which was 27 years ago. And I wrote this book, several reasons. Hopefully, one is to leave something for my 2 sons to read now or later, explaining who I was and giving them a dramatic narrative of the life of their father. And I know one son, my son who read it, really liked it, because I know that because he still calls me once a week. Because there are some things in there, even about him, that he might have found problematic or too revealing, or too much information. In fact, I was going to call him today to stress his uniqueness by asking him how many of his friends know who cut their umbilical cord.
That's a good one. Hey, well, as someone who smoked pot for decades myself, I really resonated with this quote from your book. Quote, "Maybe there is someone reading this who only smokes pot every day because it seemed like a good idea 40 years ago. No, it's because you're addicted." And then you write, "The highest you can be is when there's nothing between you and reality. Reality, the ultimate natural high, is more exciting than any drug-induced roller coaster ride." So, can you speak to that? How many people who smoke pot are addicted to pot?
The ones who've tried to stop and decided not to.
Decided they couldn't do it.
Okay, and no one loved marijuana and hashish more than I did. And I still do for people who want to get high. My point was, I think a lot of people do it because it's become a habit, and not to get high, just not to feel the withdrawal from quitting.
Right. So most people don't think there is any withdrawal from quitting.
It's because they haven't tried.
And what
I have
are
a friend, well, just there's a great radio host in Philadelphia who wrote to me and said, I have a problem with the title of your book, Cannabis Addict. I said, yeah. He said, I've smoked every day for 52 years and I can stop whenever I want.
and what did you say?
I said, what did I say?
Have you
It
tried?
was texting. I think I just ignored him. No, God bless him. He's missing out on one of the most beautiful things. He's missing out on the excitement of life that a 12-year-old experiences when they walk through the park.
Because
That we, as I'm sorry,
pot dulls your sensitivities.
maybe not at first, but after 20 or 30 years,
Right.
I think it does. Because, as you age, your whole enzymatic system processes food differently. You could have 6 beers when you're 25. You can't have 6 beers when you're 55.
Right.
Your whole system gets more delicate.
Right.
And I think that's true for weed.
Can you share with us a list of what have been the primary addictions for you in this lifetime?
For me, first addiction, mother's milk. My mother's milk. I loved it. But my father died when I was 3 weeks old. She was grief stricken, in shock, and physically unable to breastfeed me. So I was cut off at 3 weeks old. Maybe I've been chasing that since then. Next addiction, probably sugar. Definitely sugar. I used to drink 6 bottles of Coca-Cola every day for many years. Third addiction, gambling. Gambling in my early teens was, I probably would have qualified as a compulsive gambler at that age. I would do anything to gamble, and I did anything to gamble, which means occasionally steal to gamble. In junior high school, guys would come up to the schoolyard at lunch and say, "Hey, we're going to the racetrack," and I'd say, "Well, I'm coming with you," because that was way more interesting to me than the second half of high school that day. So I like to be in action. To me, there's nothing more zen-like or stimulating than horse race gambling. I called it the STP of gambling. Baseball is boring. Baseball, you got to wait for like 3 hours to figure out if you won. Football's not bad. Basketball, even if you're ahead 20 points in the first quarter, you're still incredibly stressed out. And I think part of the addiction to gambling is not winning, it's having intense feelings, be they positive or negative. Because even when I lost, I was, crippled with disappointment and pain. But it was a stronger feeling than I was feeling earlier in the day. And of course, winning was a mitzvah.
Okay, so
I'm
after
sure.
gambling, obviously,
What's that?
then beyond gambling, obviously drugs.
Oh, and I guess then television. Stone cold addiction. I think it's in the book how every Tuesday when we'd get the TV guide, it was like a Bible. It was like a guidebook to living. It was like, oh my God, because my brother was sent off to boarding school, so I was alone. And watching my 3 sons, I was their fourth son. And father knows best. I didn't have a father, but I did on television. So that was very important to keep me from feeling extremely lonely or despondent. So television, and then marijuana, I guess. That first joint, not the first hit, the first joint, my life went from black and white to color. 5 years later, when I did my first line of cocaine, it went from color to 60 millimeter Technicolor, three-dimensional, amazing. And it's a feeling that I maintained for 13 years as a coke aficionado. I don't call myself a coke addict until I was in my 13th year. Because for the first 12 years, every time I did a line or a spoon, I did it because I wanted to. But in the 13th year, I'd wake up in the morning, I'm thinking, I'm not doing any blow until after dinner. And sure enough, after lunch, I hit the stash. I tell myself, I'm not going to get high the whole next day. That never happened.
So, okay, what motivated you? Okay, you've got a very wide definition of addictions here. I mean, it's quite a variety of things that you mentioned. And do you consider being sober, being free from all of those, or just how do you define being sober?
Well, for people who adhere to the 12-step program, it means not doing drugs or drinking at all. So I don't recommend that. Most people cannot handle abstinence. Most people cannot handle relying on a power greater than themselves to make their life work. I was just watching a movie the other day, and sometimes I get sort of intellectually triggered. I don't really reach for the glass, but I was watching a movie where this man's daughter was just arrested by the FBI, and he was freaking out because it's his daughter and she's like 23 and she's being held by the FBI, and he's freaking out, and he's got his lawyer there, and the lawyer says, don't worry, I'll be able to take care of this, and the father says, but what do I do now? And the lawyer handed him a shot of whiskey, and he said, take your medicine. And at that moment I thought, shit, there will be things that happen in my life where I know that a shot of vodka would feel like medicine. Luckily, in 27 years, I haven't had to take alcohol as medicine. I take tears as medicine. I take, crying. I take feeling bad. But that scene made me think, oh man, I don't know if I can get through this whole life without a cocktail at some point. Well, it really is a social lubricant, and it's a magnificent substance used judiciously.
So now a lot of people make a conscious decision to get sober, but as you put it in your book, you were struck sober. Tell us about that.
I also backed into the rehab, literally almost with my car, with my Volvo. I wasn't going there to quit drinking or drugging. I was going because I thought I was having a nervous breakdown, probably from using an excessive amount of ecstasy, aka Molly, MDMA, for like 2 years. I was living with someone who liked doing it as much as I did, and we had an unlimited amount made by a guy in the East Bay, where I believe you were born. In Berkeley? You went to Berkeley?
I went to Berkeley, but I wasn't born in California.
Okay. A guy named Alexander Skolgin. He made the purest and the best, and I overdid it, and eventually it really is not good for your nervous system. Oh. So I went there for a rest, and the phrase "struck sober" is a euphemism for experienced a miracle. 3 days into my residency at the rehab, after already planning on leaving, I walked outside one day, and I'm reluctant to say this in 12-step meetings because I think people don't like me because of it. In an instant, 2 seconds, I felt all desire for drugs leave me. And I'm standing there thinking, I don't think I ever have to smoke pot again. I don't think I ever have to take a Percodan again, which was my favorite. I don't think, I'll ever do a line of Coke again. I was literally freed, unshackled from the dependency on drugs,
Wow.
and it
So,
blew my mind.
and you've been sober ever since. I mean, have you had any relapses at all? Now, be honest with us.
You think you can say abstinent and lie at the same time?
I have
I
no
don't think
idea.
so. No,
Okay.
you can't. You can't. It's not allowed. I think it's a matter of choice. It's a choice. Of course, I've had a million opportunities to do any drug or any alcohol I want, uh, but I prefer it this way. It's like I prefer this.
So
If
have
I
you?
preferred getting high, I would get high.
But you've substituted some of these other addictions, maybe like television or movies or something.
Well, this I'm having issues with. This is. Uh, I'm surprised I'm not going on it now.
Let
It's
let
just
let
like
let it be
while
known
you're
to our
talking, I could be while you're talking, I could be checking my email. But I have
let it be known to our listening audience that you are raising up an iPhone.
oh yes,
That's what you're
yeah,
talking about. Yeah, yeah. Right. No,
okay,
wow. Yeah, that's a common. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. To me, smartphones are the new smoking.
Right.
When people are feeling anxious or uptight or lonely, boom, they used to light a cigarette. Now it's like I'm on my phone.
Okay. So now your book's subtitle is Confessions of a Cannabis Addict. Does this mean that you're against the current tide of rampant legalization and acceptance of weed as a largely benign, non-habit forming drug?
I'm so in favor of the complete legalization of all drugs
Right.
that I can't express how happy I am to be. I say it's one of the few social or legal improvements in the last 50 years. You know, they did. Homosexuality used to be against the law. I don't think it is anymore, except maybe in West Virginia. I don't know. Uh, and they spent how many years literally throwing away, locking up hundreds of thousands of African Americans and immigrants and Mexicans just to keep the prisons full because the politician's brother owned the prison and their job was to keep that prison full. It never had anything to do with the health of America. They took the most vulnerable people and threw them in jail because they owned the prisons and us as taxpayers were financing it. So there's a marijuana shop on every other corner in LA, and I'm thrilled to see it. I'm thrilled, so happy. In
Now,
fact, I think it says what?
I was going to just ask you about sex and sex addiction. Because you write in your book, I got to walk and ponder along Ocean Drive and realized that making love to a woman I wasn't in love with felt a little empty. And as your book relates, you did a lot of that. Um, Not completely, just a little empty. Not unpleasant, just not transcendent. Good drugs and Stoli always made every sexual encounter a peak experience. Love didn't need be a part of the equation. Maybe this hollow feeling goes away after you've been sober for a while, when sex can just be sex. Okay, you've been sober for a while. What have you learned about that? And
Sex is
do you believe in sex addiction?
not for me, but I do. Yes, if you watch the movie Shame, Shame the movie, the great, incredible movie by the Academy Award winner Steve McQueen, uh, that will convince you that it is. Um, I think sex is a great natural high. It's a natural high, and if there's mutual consent, like I said, sex is one of the least. Sex is like a good meal. When it's over, it's over. Unless somebody gets a venereal disease or pregnant, it could, the next day you forgot that you even had it. But while you're having it, it's transcendent and sweet and exciting and challenging and poetic. Uh, and, it's an incredible thing. It's like you want it to last forever and you can't wait till it's over.
That's pretty good. So you talk about the rewards of sobriety in your book. You say, quote, "Sobriety is a gift. My gift was to be relieved of my cravings." There's something eloquent about living with no substances. Once you have some time being sober under your belt, it's like a reward. So it sounds like the suffering, like they say in Buddhism, suffering is caused by craving.
Suffering is caused by what?
Suffering is caused by the craving.
No, only if you can't satisfy the craving.
Right.
I always had pot and I always had Coke. The craving, that's, like I said, if you can satisfy the craving, it's like an itch. If you can, if you got a scratch.
You say my gift was to be relieved of my cravings, but you were quite able to satisfy them. So what do you mean by that?
It's funny. It's funny. I usually read from the book,
I don't know what.
but I'm glad you are. No, you picked out some good places. And what I guess I should have said, for me, the relief is never a hangover. I used to wake up sick a lot with a headache. I haven't had one hangover in 27 years. And I haven't had too much speedy products. I had a open heart surgery 15 years ago. And until then, every time I did a line, I also got scared that it wasn't good for my heart. In fact, for many years, I didn't go do cocaine because I had a heart condition growing up. And one day I asked my doctor, I said, is it dangerous for me to do cocaine? Because it was, huge at the time, as you know. And he said, just don't shoot it because you could get an infection from the needle that would kill you. But snorting it is okay. And I went right from his office right to Eric Levine's house. And I said, Eric, you got any Coke? He said, of course I have Coke. I said, I want some. He said, okay. And he put out the lines. And I remember, you get the sound effect?
Yeah.
I remember the sound of the razor going through the uncut Coke. And it sounded like a combination of John Coltrane and John Cage and Mozart and God. Just the sound alone was intoxicating. And then you get some and it's like, oh my God, this tastes like heaven.
So we're running out of time. We've only got a couple more minutes.
Oh no.
But tell us about, you've found some meaning in your life since you became sober, and it is related to addiction and recovery, and that's your Real Recovery Film Festival, spelled REEL. Why did you start a film festival dedicated to showing films about addiction?
Several reasons. I won't go into all of them because it'll take too long. But our first year, which was 14 years ago, the reason it was called Reel, REEL, because we had to rent 35 millimeter reels of film to show in a theater. And right now it's all digital. Because I thought it might be a safe place for people in recovery to come and watch The Lost Weekend. Right. The classics that if they're sitting at home and watching might be a trigger. Days of Wine and Roses. Watch it with an audience, and we would always, after every film for the last 14 years, have a clinician or a filmmaker talk about the film. So we never just showed a film and said goodnight. It's like, hey, now we're going to talk about it.
Oh, that's awesome.
What I call a mini process group. Who was the hero? Who could you relate to? So we showed a bunch of the classics, including Barfly about Charles Bukowski. And the first night of our first film festival, we showed a movie called Midnight Run, not Midnight Express, Permanent Midnight. based on a true story by a writer named Jerry Stahl, who was a television writer and was a drug addict. And Ben Stiller plays him in the movie. They both came to the theater. They sat on stage for a half hour and had a conversation about, one being the writer and Ben Stiller playing the guy he's now on stage with. And it was fantastic. It was
It sounds
was
fantastic.
an auspicious opening, I got to tell you.
I want to start viewing your film festival because it sounds so very helpful to people. And I want to thank you for doing that. And I want to thank you for being on the show. There's so much more that we could talk about that's in your book, wild stories, and just so much humanity. Thank you for writing this book, Leonard. I really enjoyed it a lot. And I wish we had more time, but we don't. But I want to be sure to tell our listeners about your website, which is addictionrecovery.ebulletin.org. Addiction Recovery eBulletin is all one word, .org. And there people can find out about your Facebook, they can find out about the things that you do, and they can sign up for your e-recovery or your recovery bulletin or eBulletin. And so thanks again, Leonard, for being with us.
Hey, Paulo, it's a pleasure. A pleasure. Let's do it again when the hardback comes out.
Okay, sounds good. I'd love that. And for those who may have turned into Pathways late today, this is your host, Paul O'Brien, author of Intuitive Intelligence, a book that shares the theme of Pathways, which is personal and cultural evolution. And Leonard just held up his book for our YouTube audience, which is High, Confessions of a Cannabis Addict. Now, don't worry, you can play or share this interview whenever you want via the internet or as a free podcast, and I'll tell you how in a minute. Today, we've been visiting with Leonard Buschel, author of High, Confessions of a Cannabis Addict. I want to say thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into Pathways, which is broadcast and streamed on the internet at kboo.fm every other Sunday morning at 8:30 USA Pacific Time. And even better, podcasts of today's show, which you can listen to and forward to others, are available for free at divination.com. That's spelled D-I-V-I nation.com, as well as via iTunes, my YouTube channel, and other free podcast servers. This is Paul O'Brien reminding you to tell your friends about Pathways Radio and podcasts. And thanks again to Leonard Buschel and all of you listeners for tuning in and being a part of the Pathways conversation.